Hi there. My name is Isaac Jimenez, and this is my presentation on my mobile practicum. I'll be kind of going over all of the projects that I'm involved in, which is a lot, and a lot of the decisions that I helped in executing and deciding. I will be also sharing what I learned within those experiences and then go over the overall learnings of this quarter. So let's start off with Geek Girl Con. So this is an application that we built for Geek Girl Con where the app houses a lot of referential material that can be accessed offline. So I was responsible within this um, like project was creating essentially the dynamic linking, and that is these little uh, or the what runs these event cards here. So when you click on it, it's actually a link and where you can pass parameters. So I'm passing in the data of the event, and you can get more detail in this event page. So this is all done through that dynamic linking. And I was also responsible in implementing the filter functionality, at least on this application. I didn't really build the filter. It was more I adapted it. And this is this allows the application to just filter locally, replicating some of the behaviors that the Geek Girl Con schedule has on their website. But yeah, okay. So one other thing that I also did was helped optimize this page. So once it became close to deadline, we were running into rendering issues where this going between days would take about almost 2 seconds. And even then, getting to this page, it would take about 2 seconds for the initial render. And so since there was that lag, I really went into the code to eventually find out that the way that we were querying the SQL was uh, more computationally expensive. So the way that I want to demonstrate this is that before we were getting this data in order by time, and if it was a different day, it was all blended in within whatever data was being produced. And so we were using functions to help create two separate arrays, which are these two right here. So we can separate, so we can have all this event data in order by days. And when I looked into the code, I ended up finding that this order by was should it be where we're separating the events by date, but the time as well. Because before it was just by time, but by the date, then we could easily extract all of that data and create two separate arrays, and have all of that being done from the back end rather than using these functions to process and sort the data on the front end. So that was probably the most valuable lesson because like that was making that simple SQL query adjustment ended up improving the performance of the application by 50%. Okay, so now let's go back to the presentation. So Another thing that I learned was uh, one of the issues that I had was creating all of these builds for debugging. So when it came like a couple days before the deadline, we were having crashes, and I got together with Ayub and Cameron to help debug and figure out what was going on. And after like days of just constantly figuring out or finding out essentially how Expo publishes a lot of their builds, I was able to create a test flight version of the app. So essentially, one of the big issues we were having in this debug was that we could not replicate the bug on device. Uh, we could only produce the app using the emulator, kind of like what I had showing earlier, like right here. So this is just running on the emulator. So the error wasn't running within the emulator, but on device. And after constantly uh, figuring out possible solutions, which was uploading a private build up to my own developer account. And then from there, creating these test flight environment to be able to replicate the error on device was really helpful. I mean, it didn't help in solving the problem, but it helped in giving us some affirmations or at least clues that we were in the right path. In finding out that it was just an interface within this specific page, and the solution was just to update our packages, which is such a simple fix, but we needed to go through all of these debugging steps in order to better understand what was happening. Okay, so now for Licton Spring review. So I was kind of responsible for quickly going over and oh, and looking into how the old website worked. And by doing so, I was able to uh, figure out what technologies they were using, which was essentially WordPress, researched a lot of background information of why WordPress became popular, just because it was like really easy to create a web application in under 2 hours without knowing how to code. And I kind of go into how Node.js took over PHP just because of its like popularity, even though PHP at the end still holds king when it comes to most websites, since almost like a third of all websites are PHP based. I also extracted the sitemap to help us with organizing the new Licton Spring review project. And Licton Springs review is essentially just a website that gets published yearly where they publish uh, just the works of local like school members or community members, where they share their writings or visual artwork as a way to inspire, or an outlet, really, just to express your creative works and possibly get feedback, which is very important, especially in the tech sector. And so when I was researching the entire tech stack, I had to then present the tech stack, which here's a little bit of a diagram of me kind of going over uh, possible tech stacks for recreating Licton Springs Review. In this presentation, essentially, I gave options where I was leaning towards using Laravel PHP. Um, and here you can see just the outline that the current solution is using WordPress for front end and back end. We would have used, the Laravel as the back end since there's a open source headless CMS, which is a content management system, which is a system used mostly for like blog posts or managing blog posts or websites with a lot of content and multimedia content. And the headless CMS, as you can see here, um, would be essentially delivering a lot of the uh, data through APIs to the front end, which the front end would consume. And so Laravel would have something similar with its headless CMS, and then the front end would be PHP or HTML and PHP. But many students wanted to lean towards more familiar technologies. So other solutions that I came up with using Python with Django, but front end being JavaScript, just because I found that a lot of students were really interested in front end. So we're probably going to have more people being able to produce the front end than the back end, because the back end tends to be a little bit more difficult and more uncomfortable to build an environment just because there's so many pieces moving. I'm not saying that front end can't get to that complexity, but with the back end, it's not just the system within, but it's also the systems outside of the head. So, like how the front end implements the data, um, it ends up helping in figuring out the structure for the back end. And so you need to know both areas in order to be able to implement the headless CMS. But yeah, students ended up picking with the Node.js. And I think this was a better solution just because learning new technologies is great, but being able to find the proper technology in which all stakeholders are respected and have an input in the direction. Node.js ended up becoming the winner, where we're going to use Next.js just because a lot of students feel comfortable within that technology. And the headless CMS is going to be Directus, which we'll be using the SDK to help migrate a lot of the WordPress backend into the headless CMS system that's open source and free. So yeah, that was a lot of impactful decisions that I was responsible for, at least that tasks. And then also for LinkedIn Spring Reviews, I helped create Sprint Force tasks. And that was essentially creating the development documentation and environment to get this project up and running. So in order to use the headless CMS Directus, you need to have a Docker environment. And so I just kind of created a simple outline of how this task should be done. And I feel that I did a pretty good job in breaking down the problems and clearly showing what tasks can help other developers when it comes to replicating this uh, pro project or task, just setting up the local development. Okay, so now let's go back. And the last one is the Shift app. So the Shift app is where it's going to focus on work study students where they right now do not have a way to swap shifts. And this would creating the Shift app would be, no, let's go back, would be the way in where work study students can swap their shifts. Uh, Now, this goes into the assumption that the supervisors would be looking over and confirming the shifts. And let's go a little bit into how I created the user flow and the UI. Let's see. Let me first see all the files online. Okay, now I got it. Share. I won't really go too deep into it just because of time, but essentially this is just the outline of the sitemap of how users would interact with this application. So here you see a user dashboard, schedules. We're going to have different page organizations since each organization might have different rules. And we could also add reference material, maybe about the shift or any tips other teammates or tutors have for when it comes to working your shift or staying organized. And so from here, ended up inspiring this, creating the updated UI. So I got some of Hanan's work and just built upon it. It does not look super nice just because I wanted to create just a functional UI. And this was done with feedback from a UI industry professional, where I have a friend that's a UI UX designer, and I had him give me feedback to better improve this app. And so here's all the functions in which, if you see some of the like diagrams showing some of the pages or the ones being built right now, well, they're all kind of based off this UI. But yeah, this was probably the most important part, just because this would lead the directions of later on of tasks of creating all these pages, which is currently being done. So it's been pretty rewarding process to be able to see some of the code created. And then same for this project, I also created the Sprint 14's task, which I can show you. Let's let's go. Oh, and this is where download where we're setting up the back end, just because this part was important since the database needs to be set up before any of the front end gets created. Since we know the front end is going to be Next.js, the back end will just always take a little bit longer to set up. And from some of the pull requests, yeah, here we have Nick, which did a great job in creating this document on how to set up the database. And kind of one of the reasons why I wanted him to be uh, part of our leadership group is because since he has a strong writing abilities, being able to write documentation and must is a bit more of a piece of cake, and that way we can elevate our documentation uh, game and also production, and so all developers can get better at developing documentations for maintenance. Okay, so let's go into final learnings. So one of the things that I learned was to iterate early and pretty often. Do not get stuck with certain ideas that you might have, and be aware that you can get into an edge K hole where you're constantly thinking of possible edge cases, which at times, I mean, that's good to know, but you need to first start implementing. And then once you get to those edge cases problems, then you start solving those problems. Uh, I think the iterating early and often can at least help you in guiding the direction of later of the app going forward later on, where you're not wasting just too much time just trying to think of the most optimal way of creating this application. Even then it makes it too hard. So uh, essentially just making all your issues, adding it up in layers and improving upon them is the best route. Also, maintaining a relationship with stakeholders is important. So when you saw that I was coming up with multiple solutions, my goal was to make all stakeholders happy. And when I came up with the different possible ways in which we could have the tech stack for the LSR app, I prioritized uh, having appeasing everyone, since it was crucial for the development of the application to make sure that all the developers' opinions were heard earlier on in order to help build some rapport that will help later on once we get into difficult and complex uh, tasks that we need to solve. Uh, People will be less likely to uh, not trust my decision making, or empower them to be able to figure out some of these solutions. And the only way you can get some of that work out is by developing a strong relationship with those that you work with. Okay, so do everything that you can to produce an MVP. This kind of builds on iterate early and often, just because you need to produce at at least the minimum viable product that have the fundamental functions that it needs to occur for the app to successfully meet all the business requirements. And this being able to produce the MVP earlier on ends up also showing the validity of how important this project is and why it needs to be created. Because if you see all of the basic functionality from your MVP, you are in a great track on producing a quality uh, product as you can start iterating and making pivots as you go. Okay, and the last one is reach out to others for help. So this is a part that I've learned at least this quarter was uh, just reaching out to multiple people and kind of getting their insights and their perspectives on how to approach maybe my issue or how they can help me achieve my goals in a timely manner. And it has been just kind of rewarding to see the early, like at least the beginning of the Shift app, how it started off as just a proposal. And then now we've reached it up to code where there's being uh, code developed for the front end and everything's moving on really quickly. And that would not be possible without the help of others in in order to execute this project in a timely manner. Otherwise, it would take multiple years for a single developer to come up with all the features and technologies for this application. And even then, I don't think if one person can do it's just not going to be as good as getting the help from other people that can give a more robust perspective to, so your application has a lot of subset of users that really get a lot of value from your application. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for watching these presentation. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions and have a nice break.